This week I went to the doctor, and it just seemed like a good idea. It's like, I don't know why, but it's like I just remember either around the first of the year or the fall, it's like, well, now we go to the doctor. And sort of funny, like, just go to the doctor, no real reason. And before the appointment, they had me fill out a couple of assessments that were related to mental health. And it was an interesting process. I was actually quite appreciative of the opportunity to reflect on how I am and where I am. I went in to see the doctor, and she did what she did, like, the leg went up and blood pressure low, has been for 40 years, the same thing year over year. And then she had the same conversation that we have. Well, now, do you like to work out? No, not really. Well, how about we make a pact? I'm like, oh, geez, here we go. And she's like, you're overweight. And I'm like, well, it is no damn surprise that people don't want to go to the doctor. Like, what in the world? Your little pact doesn't make this more fun for me. And I just listened, and I said, yes, we'll make a pact. And she's like, great. And I'm like, great. Now that we're through with that, doctor, I'm curious. Why did you have me fill out those assessments? I haven't had that experience before. And she said it's a new approach that we're trying to help screen people for mental health issues. And I said, oh, cool. I said, I think that's really great. And I said, then what happens? And she said, well, then they come in, and oftentimes people are surprised. In fact, people aren't aware of some of the things that they're dealing with until you do an assessment like that, which makes a lot of sense to me. And I said, and then what happens? And she said, well, then I usually prescribe medication. And I said, I getcha. And here's the thing, I have no issue with interventions. Like, thank God for science. And thank God for antidepressants, because I really do believe that there is a time and place and space for all of that. But what struck me was that there was nothing in addition to that. So there wasn't like, I write a prescription and then we have a conversation about, diet, or do you like working out, or anything like that. And I said, well, what happens if that doesn't work? Well, if that doesn't work, then I get a psychiatrist involved. And it occurred for me that so often we are looking for something outside of ourselves to be the solution. And again, I am all for interventions, but what I know to be true is that when human beings don't have a greater sense of reality than that which meets the eye, it will be very dark. Fear, worry, and anxiety will increase. And so I'm deeply interested, and really it's what I've devoted my life to, in supporting people to understand that there is a reality beyond that which you can see. What has been true for me is that in my greatest hours of fear, worry, and anxiety, because of this place, because of these teachings, I have some go-to practices that create great reprieve for me. And, I'd like to share from a really brilliant theologian by the name of Howard Thurman. It's from one of his books titled Meditations of the Heart. He writes, I am beginning to understand that deliverance from anxiety means fundamental growth in spiritual character and awareness. It becomes a quality of being, emerging from deep within, giving to all the dimensions of experience a vast immunity against being anxious. A ground of calm underlies experiences, whatever may be the tempestuous character of events. This calm is the manifestation in life of the active, dynamic presence. And for me, what I hear in that is that the great reprieve of anxiety is spiritual character and awareness. If we are to intervene from the outside only, we will never find peace. What was fascinating to me about sitting in my doctor's office is that I have been deeply entrenched in these tools for over 2 decades. And it takes each year my own conversation within myself to not get thrown by her annual overweight commentary. And I think it's important to notice that because there are lots of people that haven't devoted their life to these practices, that haven't devoted their life to these principles. And we can make commentary that has really significant impact on people's well-being. So this place exists and these teachings exist so that you and I can develop spiritual character and awareness, so that we can walk in this life experience paying attention to presence, to the presence, rather than paying attention to circumstance. When circumstance is all we can see, it is depressing, it is worrisome, it is anxiety producing. But when I know that there is a power greater than that which I can see, that is coursing through me, in me, as me, then I can take a breath. I've had a couple nights recently where I woke up in the middle of the night and I could feel fear was present. I didn't know why. I could make up a whole bunch of theories around why fear was present, but all I can tell you is that fear was there, and it was 3 a.m. And the access to my breath and the access to what I call truth statements can shift my awareness. The spirit of life within me is the source of my supply. The spirit of life within me is the source of my supply. There is only one life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. There is only one life. That is what will shift for me an anxious, worrisome, and fearful disposition. So, we've titled this series this month, It's All About You. And what's ironic is that we could as easily say, there is no you. And in fact, the belief, the attachment, the devotion to an individualized you is the source of all suffering. When you and I think that we are on our own, hunkering down, doing this thing called life, without any other cosmology of existence, it's fearsome, it's worrisome, it's anxiety producing. I oftentimes will have people say, but how do you know that there's something greater? Number one, I say, the thought that there's not is too daunting. I prefer thinking there is. That's good enough for me. All that Barb created was in the realm of thought. Thought produces form. We are vibratory beings that are walking on the planet as consciousness, attracting unto ourselves that which is a magnet for who and what we are. So if I am fearful, if I am worrisome, if I am anxious, I'm going to find evidence of that in all that I meet. One of the things I appreciate so much about the education that we're doing here these days is we're creating conscious containers to feel. Because if you don't have a conscious container to feel your feelings in the waves in which they occur, they calcify in your being and they become moods. And then you don't know the distinction between you and that. Then you start to think who you are is a depressed being. No, you are the presence of all that is. Pay attention to the presence, not the circumstance. Be related to circumstances, but pay attention to the presence. You know, when we talk here about this thing called God, it's very important for me that we each have our own understanding of that word. In the 12-step traditions, I think it's step 3, I made the decision to be in, help me out, step 3, turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand it. It's left to you. You define what God is. Turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand it. Turn my will and my life over to the presence. It is the great paradox of surrender. When I turn it all over at 3 a.m, when I don't know quite what it is that is stirring in me, but I can say to myself, the spirit of life within me is the source of my supply. The spirit of life within me is the source of my supply. There is only one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. I am the individualized manifestation of all that is. Lola, you are transcendent of your circumstances and conditions. You are one with the presence of love, of peace, of joy, of freedom. How accessible is that narrative for you? That, for me, is the great healing balm of fear, worry, and anxiety. It's all about you, and there is no you. You are one with all that is. Joel Goldsmith says, there is not God and you or I. There is only God expressed, manifested as individual being. There is not God and you and I. There is only God expressed, manifested as individual being. And so when we walk in relationship with one another, are we meeting the God presence? Or are we seeing, are we getting seduced by appearances? In a biblical context, you might hear, I die daily. What does that mean? I die daily. My egoic self gets laid down. May I surrender myself to something greater than the limitations, the circumstances, the conditions, the scarcity, the lack, the blame, the criticism. Oh. He goes on to say, I die daily. We must die to every suggestion that we are or have something of ourselves separate and apart from God. If that word God does not work for you, fill it in. That may I understand I am not separate and apart from life. I am not separate and apart from breath. You don't breathe you. Something's breathing you. Some animating presence, some force is breathing you. It's not separate and apart from you. It's the essence of all that is, and you are inside of that. Yesterday morning, I woke up, and something said to me, go and see your son. Go and see your son. He is in Champaign. Go see him. And I questioned that thought. We just dropped him off like 2 weeks ago. Go see him today? Yes, put the kids in the car and go see him. And I didn't listen. I talked to my son at 1 o'clock. And I was like, something's not right there. I said, would you like me to come pick you up? Yes. Lola, you could have been on your way back by now. I didn't listen. There is a guidance in you that is always available. There is a guidance in me. Oh, the times I override it. Why do I do that? The answer to which I will never know, but in each moment, I could recommit and say, Lola, listen. There is a still small voice. If there is only the presence of all that is, then how could any stirring that occurs where you are be separate and apart from that? Why would you question yourself? I mean, there are some things we should question ourselves about. So it's up to you to be discerning. But you know what I'm talking about, yes? When it occurs as if we are a separate me, it's all about me. When it occurs as if there is you and there is me, because look around, you can be like, no, I am me, and I definitely see this person as them. That feels real, right? And what I'm inviting you into is to loosen that attachment, such that you see that life is nothing more than energy in motion. One of my favorite words to play with around this is being offended. I am offended. To be offended requires a very strong commitment to a separate self. If there is no one out there against you, who is it and how could it be that you are offended? Life is just occurring. So, I drove my husband's car yesterday, and Nathan is like Abraham Hicks, like encyclopedia. He is Eckhart Tolle and Abraham Hicks. So that's who I'm living with, sleeping with, waking up next to, could be much worse. So I'm like, well, we got a cassette player, no cassettes, right? 2004, we're working it. Financial freedom, baby. And we got a CD player. And we got a lot of old Abraham Hicks CDs. So that's what we're listening to. And this is what they said. Your happiness does not depend on what others do. If that was all I heard for 6 hours in the car, that was good enough for me. Your happiness does not depend on what others do. But it really does seem like it does, doesn't it? This is the great paradox. We are in this dimension of reality learning how to be with one another. It really didn't feel great for like the several years in a row that we had the conversation about me being overweight. And my happiness does not depend on what she says or what she does. And to the extent that I am centered in the truth of my being, in the notion that the spirit of life within me is the source of my supply, I become much easier to move on the planet. Impenetrable. Dancing through life, chuckling at her idea of what is overweight. This is not overweight, I'll have you know. So imagine life occurs, something happens, it really does seem like something's happening out there to you. And here's the turnaround. Now here's the interesting thing. This is true on the affirmative side of life and the negative side of life. We prefer our affirmative experiences. Oh, Nathan makes me so happy. But it's the exact same thing. as Nathan makes me miserable. It's the same thing. You could actually start to move in relationship. I happy myself. I happy myself, and it's appearing on the screen called Nathan. I anger myself, and it's appearing on the screen called Doctor. I sadden myself, and it's appearing on the movie screen, literally. I sex myself. It really does feel like, no. If you knew this one lover, I'm going to tell you what this one would do for me. No, honey. That one was a projection of a whole world of beliefs that one elicited in you. But you created the projection and the possibility. And they showed up inside of that. Many years ago, I was very involved in a body of work that I know some of you through here. And one of my coaches there said to me, Lola, Nathan shows up exactly the way you require him to show up. No. Maybe if I explain it to you this way, you'll get what I'm talking about. No. He shows up as you require him to show up. And if you loosened your attachment to how it is that he shows up, you'd actually have to deal with being wrong about something. Your happiness does not depend on what others do. There is only one life. That life is the presence of all that is. It's perfect. It moves in me, through me, as me. It breathes me. The extent to which I am clued in, plugged in, devoted to it, I have greater access to it in moments of need. I woke up again this morning at 3:30. I had set my alarm for 4:45. And I was scared I was going to miss it. So I woke up early. And I just sat there and I breathed. The spirit of life within me is the source of my supply. The spirit of life within me is the source of my supply. My request is that we be a community of people that when it really does appear like something is happening, I scare me. I happy me. I sex me. That's my favorite one. There is this really brilliant human that I cited last week. His name is Eric Butterworth, most known by his book Spiritual Economics, which I highly recommend, but he has another book titled In the Flow of Life. And he writes, we tend unrealistically to expect the world to provide us with the kind of peace and security and love which can only come from within ourselves. We tend to look outside of ourselves, hoping maybe I'll find it out here. Maybe my peace will reside in this thing, this partner, this pair of shoes, this Volvo XC40 black on black. It's new. It just came out this year. I went through the exercise. I went to the dealership. And he said, well, how's your credit? And I was like, well, I have a little bit of a past. And he's like, well, let's just try. And I said, okay. So he pulled it. Turns out I have a 740 credit. Now look. It's not that credit is the source of my supply, but I was walking around in a story about myself. I introduced myself as someone with a past. That is wild. When I first started here 6 years ago, I inherited, I think the very first week, a lease on a copy machine. Now let me tell you how useful copy machines are in 2019. Not so much. It was clear that that was changing pretty quickly. And it was a big expense, a big monthly expense for a big behemoth of a thing that no one knew how to use. And I spent quite some time, a couple of years, irritated about this copy machine. And I was sitting in meditation this morning, and I was reminded of one of my early teachers, this guy, Bob Proctor. I met him when I was 20. And he said, get yourself, he was like a real sort of like old school, new thought, sort of like salesman. And you're like, wear the suit. My mom told me last week I was dressed like that ilk. I was like, oh, dear God. And he said, get yourself set up on an automatic debt repayment plan and focus on prosperity. The point of that is stop focusing on the circumstance. Get it handled, and then focus on the presence. Stop focusing on the contract you're in for 6 years that you've tried for 2 years to get out of. Let it go and enjoy that copy machine. I will tell you, November was our last payment on that copy machine. These are little hacks, mind hacks, so that we can start to orient our perspective such that we can create the life that is a resonant match for who we're here to be, and then be a contribution on the planet and support others in doing the same. It's a racket to sit fixated on our circumstances and conditions. So I ask you, as a practice this week, last week I invited us into morning pages. I said I'd love for you to deepen in your meditation practice, and I'd love for you to do morning pages. Keep a notebook at your bedside, and every moment the moment you wake up, just start writing stream of consciousness. My invitation for you this week is to get yourself set up on an automatic meditation practice and focus on the presence. When he said set yourself up on an automatic debt repayment plan and focus on prosperity, in that time and place, I couldn't do an automatic debt repayment plan. That was way too risky. Because I needed to, navigate a bunch of things. It was like a little juggling going on Planet Lola. But eventually I got there. And to set myself up on an automatic practice, paying attention to the presence rather than fixating on the problem or fixating on the circumstance.